We have some breaking news out of Lisbon Falls tonight, where police have announced a shelter-in-place order. The Lisbon Police Department says this is in effect from Houston Street to the north of School Street. They say all streets in between that area are affected. You should stay inside, lock all doors and windows, and avoid the impacted area. Police say several agencies are currently searching for a potentially armed suspect near Houston Park. We do have a crew on the way to Lisbon Falls. We will keep you updated as we learn more.
As Maine goes, so goes the nation. Together, we will defeat Susan Collins.
Continuing our primary election coverage this evening, Graham Platner, who you just heard from there, is projected to take the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate. Current figures show Platner up by about 50 points, with more than 90% of votes counted now. His main opponent, sitting Governor Janet Mills, suspended her campaign in early May. She said she had run out of money, but her name did remain on the ballot. And at this hour, figures show her coming in with just under 20% of the vote.
Now, during last night's victory speech in Blue Hill, Platner blasted his November rival, incumbent Senator Susan Collins.
Platner made several assertions about her career and voting record. News Center Maine's Phil Hirschkorn joining us live in the newsroom now with a fact check. Hi, Phil.
Hi there, Brian and Amanda. So Platner spoke for nearly 25 minutes, and here's a closer look at some of those claims.
It is deeply humbling to stand here as your Democratic nominee.
In his primary victory speech, Graham Platner pivoted quickly to attack his fall opponent, incumbent Republican Susan Collins.
Susan Collins said she would only serve 2 terms. She's now running for her 6th.
That's true. This is what Collins said in a debate during her first Senate campaign in 1996.
If I'm elected, I will only serve 2 terms, regardless of whether term limits law, a constitutional amendment passes or not. 12 years is long enough to be in public service, make a contribution, and then come home and let someone else take your place.
She has worked in politics longer than Joe Biden.
That's false. Biden first ran for office in Delaware in 1970, 5 years before Collins began working as a congressional staffer. Platner criticized Collins for her 2018 vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
She got elected promising to protect Roe versus Wade, only to turn around and put a justice of the Supreme Court who overturned it.
Kavanaugh did, along with 3 other justices Collins had confirmed. But she also voted for Democratic Supreme Court nominees who support abortion rights.
I never hear the Democrats giving me credit for having voted for Justice Sotomayor, for example, or Justice Kagan.
If you are an independent voice, why do you vote with Donald Trump 95% of the time?
That rating by Congressional Quarterly Vote Watch was only for 2025. The nonpartisan Georgetown Lugar Center has ranked Collins most bipartisan senator in 9 of their 11 indexes.
And Susan Collins has never met a war she didn't like. She's been supporting endless wars since I was a teenager.
Collins did support the Afghanistan and Iraq wars that Platner volunteered to fight in. But this year,
I voted against the president on a war powers resolution when he indicated that he was going to, in some ways, take over Venezuela and its oil and have boots on the ground there.
While Collins initially supported the Iran war, she's now voted several times to end it.
I would not support authorizing military hostilities beyond that 60-day point, or if ground troops are deployed.
One Platner charge was personal and financial.
Susan Collins has gotten 21 times wealthier just in the last 15 years.
That's based on Collins's mandatory financial disclosure forms, showing a net worth as high as $9.5 million. But the wealth is primarily from her husband, who she married in 2012, and his stock portfolio.
In all my time in the Senate, I have never bought, owned, or sold a single piece of stock. I've always just had mutual funds.
Collins has said her husband has an independent financial advisor who manages the portfolio without consultation, like a blind trust.
Though we have no investments as a couple, he has his investments, I have mine. We keep them totally separate.
Platner also blamed Collins for hospitals closing in Maine, in part for voting to advance President Trump's budget bill last year. But Collins voted against final passage due to Medicaid cuts. To compensate for those, Collins then sponsored legislation for a $50 billion fund for rural hospitals, from which Maine received $190 million. Brian and Amanda, back to you.
Phil, thank you. In light of Platner's nomination, President Donald Trump told reporters today that Susan Collins has his full support going into November. It's despite Collins being adversarial to the president's policies at times.
She never missed a vote. Unfortunately, because sometimes she voted against me. You know, look, she's a sane woman, and she's a respected person. Maybe a little different ideology than me, but this guy is a thug. He's a fake thug. He's a phony.
As Phil mentioned, throughout her long career in the Senate, Collins has maintained her position as a moderate. In 2020, a significant number of voters split their tickets between her and Democrat Joe Biden. That year, she kept her seat with 51% of the vote, where Mr. Trump lost Maine.
Now, turning back to the primary results, we are a day in at this point. We still don't know all of the candidates that will be appearing on your ballot in November.
Joining us now from the newsroom, Chris Costa with a closer look at the Democratic race for Congressional District 2. Chris, the results here even tighter than many expected.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian and Amanda. We actually got word from the Secretary of State's office today that ranked choice tabulation won't start until Friday, so we can all kind of take a breath until the final tabulation begins. We talked about the ranked choice voting runoff, and here's exactly why. These two, Matt Dunlap and Jordan Wood, so close, only separated by 200 votes. And again, nobody has more than 50%, even Joe Baldacci, the current leader. I think you guys are going to find this interesting. Look at the number of votes cast in the Democratic primary for CD2. The last time we had a Democratic primary for CD2 was in June of 2018. That was Jared Golden running against Lucas St. Clair and Craig Olson. Nearly 40,000 people voted in that one. Nearly 70,000 people voted in this Democratic primary for CD2. In that last case in June of 2019, Golden ended up running against Bruce Poliquin, who ran unopposed as a Republican. This time, they're going to be heading up against Paul LePage, who is well known here in Maine politics. Brian and Amanda, we'll send it back to you.
All right, Chris, our thanks for you. A little closer look at those numbers tonight. Ranked choice voting is still relatively new in Maine. It was first implemented in the 2018 midterm.
Maine uses an instant runoff model, meaning the candidates with the fewest votes have, at this point, been eliminated from the running. Voters who ranked those candidates first will then have their second choice counted instead.
That process then repeats until one candidate reaches a majority. Christian Harsa has more details on the process.
Patience is a virtue, and when it comes to ranked choice voting, you have to have at least a little bit of patience.
It's a multi-day process because it just takes a lot of time.
A lot of that time is spent collecting ballots and flash drives from Maine's 487 towns and cities. And per state law, only police can do the transportation.
So once everything's back in Augusta, all transported by law enforcement and very secure, then we start the tabulation process.
Chief Deputy Secretary of State Catherine McBrien says then nonpartisan state election officials work town by town,
uploading the data from their tabulator machines to hardened computers that are never connected to the internet.
Some towns don't have machines, so the process has to be done by hand.
After all of that is entered, then we can run the tabulation formula.
And how long does that take to do?
So the upload process, many days, but running the actual tabulation just takes a matter of minutes.
There isn't a hierarchy for when each race can get tabulated, so if all the ballots are ready for CD2,
we could go ahead and start uploading for Congressional District 2 and run that race, simply because it's smaller than everything in the entire state for, say, the gubernatorial.
The public and media can watch the process unfold in person and online. McBrien says the goal is to have the results done by June 19th.
No guarantee, but that's what we're trying for.
Maine law requires that election results be handed over to the desk of Governor Janet Mills for certification within 20 days of the election, so before June 29th. In Augusta, Christian Harsa, News Center, Maine.
Another note, by the way, if there are recounts for any races, those results also have to adhere to that June 29th deadline.
In Ellsworth, efforts to recall multiple city councilors is gaining traction. It comes after a litany of controversial decisions, some dealing with city coffers.
News Center Maine's Akua DeVal breaks down the growing conversation in that community.
Because people felt like they were in despair, right? They're just supposed to deal with their taxes.
Fiscal concerns are now fielding a recall petition from residents targeting 5 Ellsworth city councilors. It comes following months of disputes over spending decisions that some say have contributed to higher property taxes.
The big thing is being heard, and when you go in there constantly at city council meetings and you watch them online and people are not being heard or it's just taken for granted, that leaves a sense of distrust in your city government.
Tiffany Gasper, who started the petition, says it's about holding local government accountable and giving residents a stronger voice in city decisions. The recall effort requires more than 1,200 signatures, or 20% of registered voters, to move forward. But others say the recall push is being driven by more than budget concerns.
This recall is retaliation against the 5 councilors that voted to censure Councilor O'Halloran.
Council Chair Patrick Lyons says a recent vote to censure Councilor Stephen O'Halloran comes amid allegations of inappropriate comments towards city staff. He adds that growing population and increased tourism are also putting additional financial pressure on the city.
We take our jobs very seriously in balancing taxation versus providing the services that we need to provide as a major service center and also as the gateway to Acadia National Park.
Councilor O'Halloran says he does not believe councilors should be removed, but acknowledges his comments have drawn scrutiny. He also says there should be greater transparency in how city funds are spent.
We're spending money that doesn't need to happen. And the way they are going about it doesn't need to happen. We need to think about the city taxpayers.
Gasper says the petition is approaching the halfway mark for required signatures. Lyons argues removing city councilors could undermine stability in local government.
To have those 5 councilors removed from office in retaliation would be devastating for city morale. But again, with 2 councilors, you can't get any business done.
Really building that trust up within the residents of Ellsworth would drastically improve anything to do with City Hall and to improve decisions that they're making at City Council level.
In Ellsworth, Akua DeVal, News Center, Maine.
Petition organizers must collect enough valid signatures by June 26 to trigger a recall election.